The Valyrians had always been a peaceful people. Their bodies were made of crystal that shimmered with soft light, and their minds were sharp and logical. They had built their civilization over thousands of years without war, without violence, without the kind of chaos that other species seem to breed like disease. They lived in harmony with their world, with each other, and with the few allied species they traded with across the stars. But peace, the Valyrians were learning, could not protect you from those who had no interest in peace. The first attack came without warning. A Korthian battlecruiser descended through the atmosphere of Valyria Prime and began firing on the civilian settlements near the crystal mines. The Valyrians had no weapons to speak of, no military force, no means of defense. Their philosophy had always been that violence solved nothing, that dialogue and reason could bridge any gap. The Korthians did not believe in dialogue or reason. Captain Marcus Flynn sat in his office aboard the HHSS Discovery, reviewing reports about a new trade agreement with the Valyrians. The Discovery was a research vessel, not a warship. It was designed to explore peaceful worlds, to study new cultures, to help build bridges between species. Flynn was a man who believed in that mission. He had spent his entire career in research and diplomacy, and he wore his uniform with pride, knowing that what he did mattered. His communications officer, Officer Paul Adams, burst through the door. Paul was young, energetic, and good at his job. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. This was not normal for Paul. "Sir, we are receiving a priority distress call from the Valyrian Council," Paul said, his voice tight. "They are under attack. Multiple settlements have been hit. They are asking for help." Flynn stood up immediately.
"Show me everything."
"What do we know?" Paul led him to the communication station where the message was repeating on loop. The voice was clear but strained. The speaker identified himself as Crystallarch Velen, the leader of the Valyrian people. He explained that an aggressive faction called the Korthians had begun a coordinated assault on 3 different star systems. They were attacking civilian centers. They were destroying agricultural facilities. They were killing people. The Valyrians needed help. They needed it now. Flynn's mind worked quickly. The Discovery was the closest human ship to Valyrian space. They could reach the systems in 4 days if they pushed hard. The ship had medical supplies, basic weapons for self-defense, and a trained diplomatic team. It was not ideal, but it was better than nothing. He made a decision. Paul sent a response message. "Tell the Crystallarch that the Discovery is on the way. Tell him that humanity will help. Tell him to get as many civilians to safe locations as possible and to hold on." Flynn paused. "Then send a priority transmission to Earth Command. Get Admiral Catherine Holmes. Tell her what is happening." 4 days later, the Discovery dropped out of faster-than-light travel and entered Valyrian space. What Flynn saw took his breath away. 3 orbital platforms hung silent and dark. Entire sections of the Valyrian primary settlement showed signs of recent bombardment. Fires still burned in some areas, and the energy signatures from the planet showed massive destruction. Flynn immediately contacted the Crystallarch. Velen's response came through the communication system, and the being sounded exhausted. They arranged for the Discovery to enter orbit and begin coordination with the remaining Valyrian defense forces. Dr. Lisa Morgan, the ship's chief xenobiologist, began preparing the medical bay. Chief Engineer David Carter started checking what systems they could use to help with repairs and reconstruction. When Captain Flynn and his team beamed down to the primary settlement, they found a civilization in shock. The Valyrians moved slowly, their crystal bodies reflecting the dim light of their damaged city. Some were injured. Many were traumatized. Crystallarch Velen greeted Flynn with what the captain could recognize as deep gratitude, though the Valyrian way of expressing emotion was different from human emotion. "You came," Velen said. His voice carried weight and meaning. "You came alone." "We are here to help," Flynn replied. "My people are preparing medical facilities. We have teams ready to assist with search and rescue operations. We will do everything we can." Over the next hours, Flynn's team worked tirelessly. Dr. Lisa Morgan and her medical staff treated wounded Valyrians. Engineers began cataloging damage and identifying what could be repaired. Officer Paul Adams worked with the Valyrian communication specialist to understand the full scope of the attack and identify safe zones where refugees could gather. But in those same hours, something else was happening back on Earth. Admiral Catherine Holmes sat in the Fleet Command Center watching real-time data from the Valyrian systems. She was an older woman, gray-haired and stern-faced, but her eyes were sharp and her mind sharper. She had spent her entire career protecting human interests and supporting allied species. She knew what it meant when peaceful people were attacked by those with weapons and no conscience. She made a call to Earth's governmental council. Her words were measured but firm. "The Valerians are defenseless and they are being slaughtered," she said. "The Corthians have military advantage and they are using it to commit what appears to be genocide. If we do nothing, an entire civilization will be erased. Earth cannot stand by and allow that to happen." The council members debated, but they listened to Holmes. They trusted her judgment. Within 2 hours, the decision was made. The Third Fleet would be mobilized. Every available warship would be prepared. Every trained soldier would be brought to readiness. Humanity was going to war, not for territory or resources, but because the right thing to do was to protect those who could not protect themselves. Admiral Holmes sent the activation order to the fleet. Across Earth's naval bases, ships that had been in port or in maintenance operations powered up. Crews rushed to their stations. Supply vessels began loading weapons and equipment. The Third Fleet consisted of 12 major warships, each one capable of independent operations, along with 6 support vessels and transport ships carrying personnel, medical supplies, and reconstruction equipment. The journey to Valerian space would take 2 days at maximum speed. As the fleet raced across the darkness of space, Admiral Holmes sent a message directly to Captain Flynn. She told him that help was coming. She told him that he was not alone. She told him that Earth was sending its full military might to ensure that the Valerians would survive. Captain Flynn received the message while he was working with the Crystal Arc in the damaged communications center. When he heard the news, he felt something shift in his chest. He had come here expecting to negotiate, to help, to serve as a bridge between peoples. He had not expected that his call for help would result in this kind of response. He understood now that humanity did not do things halfway. When people called for help, when innocent lives were at stake, Earth responded with everything it had. Crystal Arc Velen heard the same message, and the ancient being's crystalline structure seemed to glow brighter. "Your people are sending their warriors," Velen said softly. "Yes," Flynn replied. "Because you are our friends. Because we protect those we care about, and because no one should suffer the way your people have suffered." The stage was set. The humans were coming. The Valerians would soon learn what it meant to have the Deathworlders as allies, and the Corthians, wherever they were in the darkness of space, had no idea what was about to happen to them. They had made the terrible mistake of attacking a species that was under human protection. That mistake would cost them everything. The morning after Captain Flynn received the message about the incoming fleet, Crystal Arc Velen sat with him in what remained of the Valerian council chamber. The walls were cracked and some sections had collapsed entirely, but the core of the room still stood. The ancient leader of the Valerians looked out through the damaged opening toward the sky, his crystalline body reflecting the pale sunlight. Dr. Lisa Morgan entered with medical reports. She had been working through the night, treating injuries and assessing the overall health situation in the settlements. Her face showed exhaustion, but her voice was steady and professional. She told Flynn that they had stabilized most of the critical patients, but they needed better medical facilities. They needed more supplies. The Discovery could only do so much. Flynn assured her that help was on the way. He did not tell her how much help. He wanted to see the look on her face when the fleet arrived. Officer Paul Adams worked in the communication center with a team of Valerians. They were trying to establish contact with the other 2 attacked settlements. The communication network had been damaged severely, but they managed to get partial signals through. In the second settlement, called Valeria Delta, the situation was even more dire than at the primary location. In the third settlement, Valeria Epsilon, the people had managed to evacuate to underground shelters before the main assault. Crystal Arc Velen moved through the settlement with Captain Flynn, assessing the damage. The Valerians had built their cities with beauty and harmony in mind. Their architecture curved and flowed with natural lines. Their buildings were grown from crystal and stone that had been shaped over generations. Now entire blocks lay in ruins. The Corthians had shown no mercy. They had bombed homes, markets, schools, and hospitals. "Why do they hate us?" a young Valerian asked Velen as they walked past a destroyed building. The being's voice carried confusion and pain. "We have never harmed them. We have never threatened them." Crystal Arc Velen placed a hand on the young one's shoulder. "Some beings are driven by greed and anger, rather than reason and compassion. The Corthians want our resources. They want to conquer our space. They have decided that force is easier than negotiation. It is a flaw in their thinking, but it is a deadly flaw. Flynn listened to this exchange and felt the weight of it. These were a people who had never known violence on their own world, and now they were experiencing something they had no framework to understand. He was about to respond when Officer Paul Adams called him on the communication device. "Sir, you need to see this," Paul said. His voice carried excitement and something else that Flynn could not quite identify. "Our long-range sensors are picking up something. Multiple energy signatures approaching the system from the coordinates where the Admiral said the fleet would appear." Flynn excused himself and moved quickly to the communication center. What he saw on the screens made him pause. Paul had not exaggerated. Multiple massive energy signatures were approaching. Each one represented a warship of significant size. The data showed 12 major contacts and 6 additional support signatures. The fleet was arriving. "How long until they enter the system?" Flynn asked. 57 minutes at current velocity," Paul replied. He was staring at the data with something like awe. "Sir, I have never seen a fleet this large coordinated into attack formation. Admiral Holmes is not taking any chances." Flynn opened a communication channel to Crystallark Velen. "The human fleet is arriving. We should prepare the council. I want them to understand what is about to happen." The Crystallark and his council members gathered once again in the damaged chamber. Flynn stood before them and explained what was coming. He told them about Admiral Catherine Holmes and the Third Fleet. He described the capabilities of modern human warships. He explained that within the hour, the sky above Valeria Prime would be filled with human vessels. Some of the council members seemed anxious about this. They worried about bringing armed military forces to their world. But Crystallark Velen raised his hand and spoke with the authority of his ancient years. "The humans are not our enemies. They have already proven this by sending Captain Flynn and his team. They are now sending their greatest warriors to ensure that the Corthians cannot harm us further. This is what protection means in the galaxy. We must accept this gift with gratitude." As the time approached, Flynn led Velen and several council members to an observation platform that overlooked the main city. Officer Paul Adams stood nearby with a communication headset, tracking the approaching fleet. The sky was clear and blue. In the distance, the first human ships began to appear. They came out of the darkness of space like metal birds descending from heaven. The lead warship was enormous, a carrier that stretched over 1,000 meters in length. Its hull was dark gray, built for function rather than beauty, designed to project power and capability. Behind it came destroyers and frigates, each one bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. The support vessels moved more slowly, loaded with supplies and personnel. As the ships entered the system, they activated their communication arrays. Admiral Catherine Holmes's voice came through every speaker on the planet. It was calm and measured and carried absolute confidence. "This is Admiral Catherine Holmes of the Third Fleet of the Human Defense Force. We have arrived in response to a request for assistance from the Valerian people. All Corthian forces are hereby warned. Leave this space immediately or face annihilation. We do not negotiate with those who target civilians. We do not compromise with aggressors. You have 6 hours to depart this system. After that time, any Corthian vessel remaining will be treated as a hostile target." The message was clear and brutal in its honesty. This was not diplomacy. This was the voice of military might backed by overwhelming force. Crystallark Velen's crystalline body seemed to glow brighter. He stood on the observation platform, watching as the human fleet moved into defensive positions around the 3 Valerian systems. The being spoke softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "So this is what it means to have someone stand beside you. This is what protection truly looks like." Captain Flynn stood next to the Crystallark. He understood what Velen was feeling. The Valerians had reached out in desperation, expecting perhaps 1 or 2 ships to arrive within weeks. Instead, an entire fleet had appeared within days. The scale of humanity's response was almost incomprehensible to a people who had never known violence, let alone military conflict. "Admiral Holmes is requesting a video conference with you," Officer Paul Adams announced. He was setting up the equipment in the council chamber, connecting the communication systems to the flagship of the human fleet. Minutes later, Admiral Catherine Holmes appeared on the screen. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back in a military style. Her uniform bore the insignia of her rank and her years of service. Her eyes were sharp and kind at the same time, which was an unusual combination. She looked directly at Crystallark Velen. Crystallark, I am Admiral Holmes. I am here to ensure that you and your people are protected. The Third Fleet will maintain a defensive perimeter around all three of your systems. Our sensors are scanning for any Korthian activity. We have also dispatched humanitarian teams to assist with medical care, search and rescue operations, and reconstruction efforts. Captain Flynn will coordinate with our incoming personnel. You have my word that no further harm will come to the Valerians under our watch. Crystallark Velen placed his hand over his chest in a gesture of deep respect. Admiral Holmes, your response has been beyond what we could have hoped for. We came to you as strangers asking for help. You arrived as the protectors we did not know we needed. How can we ever repay such kindness? Admiral Holmes allowed herself the smallest smile. By surviving and rebuilding, by remembering that when darkness came, humanity stood with you. That is payment enough. Admiral Holmes out. The screen went dark. In the council chamber and in the observation platform, the Valerians stood in silence, watching the human fleet continue to move into position. The sky above Valeria Prime was now filled with human warships. The Korthians had 6 hours to leave. The Valerians were no longer alone. Captain Flynn felt a sense of peace settle over him. This was what humanity could be at its best. Not conquerors, but protectors. Not aggressors, but defenders of the weak. The discovery had brought the first hope. Now the fleet had brought absolute security. The Deathworlders had arrived, and the age of Korthian attacks had ended. Commander Rekka stood in the center of the Korthian command vessel and stared at the data on his screens. He was a large being with thick gray skin and eyes that burned with anger and ambition. For 3 months, his faction had been attacking Valerian settlements without resistance. The crystal miners had been easy targets. The civilian populations had been defenseless. Rekka had grown confident that Valerian space was his to take. Then the humans appeared. Rekka had heard stories about humans. Everyone in this sector of space had heard stories. Humans were aggressive. Humans were unpredictable. Humans built weapons that defied logic and strategy, but Rekka had never actually encountered a human military force. He believed the stories were exaggerations, tales told by those who feared change. When Admiral Holmes's warning came through, Rekka's first reaction was anger. He gathered his commanders in the war room of his flagship, the Korthian cruiser called Destroyer of Worlds. It was a name that seemed fitting to him. The ship had participated in the destruction of 3 Valerian settlements. The name reflected power and dominance. The humans think they can intimidate us, Rekka said, his voice harsh and filled with contempt. They come with their big ships and their threats. They do not understand what we are capable of. They do not understand that we have already won in this sector. The Valerians are finished. Now the humans will learn what it means to challenge the Korthian people. His officers exchanged uncertain glances. Not all of them shared Rekka's confidence. One officer, a younger Korthian named Voss, spoke up carefully. Commander, the human fleet is significantly larger than our battle group. We have 8 ships. They have 12 major warships and 6 support vessels. The tactical disadvantage is severe. Rekka turned on Voss with fury in his eyes. Are you suggesting we retreat? Are you suggesting we show fear to these newcomers? We have not come this far by running from fights. We have come this far by being the most aggressive, the most willing to use force, the most determined. We will stand our ground. We will show the humans that Korthian space is not to be invaded without consequences. Voss said nothing more. To speak further would be to question the commander, and questioning Rekka was dangerous. So the younger officer remained silent and watched as Rekka issued orders to prepare for combat. Back at the human fleet command center aboard the flagship, Admiral Holmes watched the Korthian movements on her tactical display. She had given them 6 hours. 3 hours had passed. The Korthian battle group was still in the system, and now their ships were moving into attack positions. They are not leaving, her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Susan Webb, reported. Webb was one of the most experienced combat officers in the fleet. She had studied hundreds of alien species and their military doctrines. She was very good at predicting what would happen next. No, Admiral Holmes agreed. They are not. They are going to attack. They believe they can win. What is our response? Webb asked. Admiral Holmes's face was calm and focused. She had been preparing for this kind of situation her entire career. She understood that some conflicts could not be solved through negotiation. Some aggressors understood only force. The Corthians had made their choice when they decided to attack instead of withdraw. "Stand by all weapon systems," Holmes ordered. "Activate defensive shields on all vessels. Prepare for combat engagement. When the Corthians fire, we respond with overwhelming force. I do not want any human casualties. I do not want prolonged combat. I want this conflict ended quickly and decisively. Is that clear?" "Clear, Admiral," Webb replied. She began giving orders to the fleet through the communication system. On the observation platform above Valeria Prime, Captain Flynn and Crystallark Velon watched the Corthian ships begin to move. The Valerian's crystal body became dull and dark as fear overwhelmed him. Flynn placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "The Corthians are about to learn an important lesson," Flynn said quietly. "When you fight humans, you lose." The first Corthian weapons fired. Plasma bolts shot across the darkness of space, directed at the nearest human destroyer. The destroyer activated its shields, and the plasma bolts exploded against them like fireworks against glass. The human ship did not even slow down. Then the human fleet responded. What happened next was not a battle. It was a demonstration of military superiority so complete and overwhelming that it barely qualified as combat. The human ships were equipped with targeting systems that could track multiple Corthian vessels simultaneously. Their weapons were more advanced, more accurate, and more powerful than anything the Corthians had ever encountered. Within seconds of the Corthian attack, human weapons were firing back. The Corthian destroyer that had been hit first began to break apart. Its shields failed under the concentrated assault of human weapons. Its hull burst open, and then it simply ceased to exist as a functioning vessel. The ship was gone, destroyed so completely that there was almost nothing left. Commander Rekka watched his ship die in his display screens. He tried to give orders, but there was no time. The human fleet was moving with perfect coordination. Each human ship was attacking a different Corthian vessel. The Corthians attempted to maneuver and respond, but they were outmatched in every way that mattered. One Corthian cruiser managed to fire several weapons before it too was destroyed. Another ship tried to retreat, but the human vessels cut off its escape route. There was nowhere to go and nothing to do except fight and die. The combat lasted less than 2 hours. At the end of that time, the Corthian battle group had been completely destroyed. Every single Corthian ship was gone. Some had been shattered by directed energy weapons. Others had been destroyed by missiles that the human fleet had launched with perfect accuracy. A few had attempted to flee and had been pursued and eliminated. Not a single Corthian ship escaped the system. Admiral Holmes watched the final explosion on her tactical display. She felt no satisfaction, only the grim knowledge that she had done what was necessary. She opened a communication channel to all remaining Corthian positions throughout the 3 systems. "This is Admiral Catherine Holmes of the 3rd Fleet. The Corthian battle group that attacked Valerian space has been eliminated. Every ship in that battle group has been destroyed. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. Any remaining Corthian forces in this sector are to withdraw immediately. If you do not leave within 1 hour, you will suffer the same fate. The humans have arrived and Valerian space is now under our protection." Throughout the Corthian settlements and outposts in the 3 systems, commanders and soldiers heard this message. They understood the reality of the situation. The humans had destroyed an entire battle group in less than 2 hours. They did not stand a chance against such power. One by one, the remaining Corthian installations began to shut down their systems. Supply ships that had been harvesting resources started to depart. Military outposts that had been built to support the occupation began to evacuate. Within the hour, every remaining Corthian presence was gone from Valerian space. On the observation platform, Crystallark Velon watched as the human ships moved into defensive positions. The battle was over. The Corthians had been defeated completely. The Valerians were safe. Captain Flynn saw tears of crystalline liquid forming on Velon's face. It was the first time he had ever seen a Valerian cry. "It is finished," Velon said softly. "The threat is gone." "Yes," Flynn agreed. "The Deathworlders have shown the Corthians what happens when you attack those under human protection." In the Fleet Command Center, Admiral Holmes received a report that all Corthian forces had left the system. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. This was why she led a military force, not to conquer or to dominate, but to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Valerians were safe now. That was what mattered. She opened a communication channel to Captain Flynn. Captain, the immediate threat has been neutralized. Begin coordinating humanitarian relief efforts with the Valerians. We have won the battle. Now it is time to help them rebuild. Understood, Admiral, Flynn replied. Thank you for coming. Holmes allowed herself a small smile. That is what allies do, Captain. We stand together. Now let us show the Valerians what else humanity can do. The first transport ships arrived 2 days after the battle ended. They brought medical personnel, engineers, construction equipment, and supplies. The human fleet established a command center on the ground near the primary Valerian settlement. Admiral Catherine Holmes came down from the flagship and met with Crystal Vellon in what remained of the council chamber. Holmes was dressed in a combat uniform, her gray hair pulled back tightly, her bearing commanding, but not cold. When she looked at Vellon, there was genuine compassion in her eyes. She extended her hand in the human greeting, and Vellon understood the meaning. He placed his crystalline hand in hers. The immediate military threat is over, Holmes said. Now we begin the real work. We rebuild. We heal. We make sure that the Corthians never threaten you again. Commander Robert Hayes was the chief logistics officer for the Third Fleet. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a practical mind. Hayes had coordinated relief efforts on a dozen different worlds. He knew how to organize chaos into order. He began working with the Valerians to assess what supplies were most needed. The damage was extensive. 3 settlements had been partially destroyed. Thousands of Valerians were homeless or injured. Agricultural facilities that fed the population had been damaged. Water purification systems were offline. Communication networks were broken. The task seemed impossible until Hayes began to organize the human response. Dr. Henry Patterson was the chief surgeon for the fleet. He was an older man who had spent 40 years in medicine. His hands were gentle and his voice was calm even in the most stressful situations. When he arrived at the primary medical facility, he found Valerian healers working with primitive equipment, struggling to treat dozens of injured beings. Patterson immediately began unpacking the advanced human medical technology. He had portable diagnostic equipment, advanced surgical tools, and medicines that could treat most common injuries. More importantly, he had trained personnel. He called together his medical team and assigned them to work alongside the Valerian healers. We are here to help, not to take over, Patterson told his team. The Valerians have their own methods and their own knowledge. We share what we have and we learn from them. Respect their expertise. Work with them as partners, not as superiors. The first patient was a young Valerian named Kella. She had been trapped in a collapsed building for 3 days before being rescued. Her crystalline body was cracked in several places, and her internal systems were severely damaged. The Valerian healers had done everything they could, but they could not save her with their equipment and knowledge alone. Dr. Patterson examined her with his diagnostic scanner. The machine showed him exactly what was wrong inside Kella's body. He explained to the Valerian healers what he was seeing and what needed to be done. Then he worked with them to perform the treatment. The Valerian healers learned from Patterson's techniques, and Patterson learned about the unique crystalline biology of the Valerians. When Kella woke up, her cracks were sealed, and her internal injuries were healed. She looked at Dr. Patterson with wonder in her eyes. She tried to thank him, but Patterson took her hand and smiled. Thank the Valerians who rescued you, he said. Thank your own healers who kept you alive until we could help. I just used tools that they did not have. The credit belongs to everyone. Throughout the 3 settlements, similar stories were playing out. Human engineers worked with Valerian construction workers to repair buildings. The humans had equipment that could lift massive pieces of rubble. They had power tools and materials that made reconstruction faster. But they worked alongside the Valerians, teaching them how to use the equipment, learning from the Valerians about the best way to rebuild structures in a way that fit Valerian architecture and values. In the agricultural sector, human scientists worked with Valerian farmers to assess crop damage and plan replanting. The humans brought seeds from Earth that could supplement the Valerian food supply. They had fertilizers and growth accelerators. But most importantly, they brought knowledge and technology that could increase crop yields. One human engineer, named Marcus, was working on a water purification system. when a young Valerian named Tren approached him. Tren was nervous about talking to the human, but he was curious about the technology. "How does it work?" Tren asked, pointing to the equipment. Marcus smiled and began to explain. He showed Tren how the filtration system worked, how the water was cleaned, how the minerals were balanced. Tren listened intently and asked questions. By the end of the day, Tren understood how the system functioned. Marcus showed him how to perform maintenance on it. "Now you can teach other Valerians," Marcus said. "This technology is useful, but knowledge is even more useful. If you know how to fix it and maintain it, then you are not dependent on us. You can take care of yourselves." This became the philosophy of the entire human operation. The goal was not to make the Valerians dependent on human aid. The goal was to help them rebuild to a point where they were stronger than they had been before. Admiral Holmes spent time walking through the refugee camps. She sat with displaced Valerians and listened to their stories. An older female named Stellara told her about losing her family home of 300 years. Stellara expected the human to dismiss her pain as unimportant. Instead, Holmes listened with full attention, and Stellara saw tears in the human's eyes. "We will help you rebuild," Holmes said. "Better than before. And I want you to know something. What happened to you and your people was not acceptable. In the human belief system, every life matters. Every home matters. Every family matters. We came here to make sure this never happens again." Cristalarch Velen watched the humans work. He saw how they treated the Valerians with respect and dignity. He saw how they worked alongside the Valerians instead of dictating to them. He saw that these fierce Deathworlders had hearts full of compassion. One evening, Velen walked through the primary settlement with Captain Flynn. They could see the progress that had been made. Buildings were being repaired. Medical facilities were operating at full capacity. Food distribution centers were being established. The Valerians were no longer in crisis mode. They were beginning to recover. "Your people are different than we expected," Velen said to Flynn. "We have studied humans in our academic materials. We learned that humans are aggressive and that they seek to dominate. But what we see here is something else entirely." Flynn nodded. "Humans can be aggressive when defending themselves or others. But when we commit to helping someone, we do it completely. We use our strength not to control but to protect. And we value compassion as much as we value power." Velen looked at the captain directly. The Valerian's crystalline body glowed softly in the evening light. "I have a proposal for the council to make. But first I wanted to speak with you." "What is it?" Flynn asked. "The humans saved our civilization," Velen said. "They came not because they owed us anything, but because it was the right thing to do. They have fought for us. They have healed our wounded. They are rebuilding our homes. They are asking nothing in return except friendship." Flynn listened carefully. "I want to propose that we formally recognize humanity as kin species," Velen continued. "In our tradition, kin species are those who have proven themselves worthy of our deepest trust and commitment. It is a bond that goes deeper than simple alliance. It means that your people are our family now." Captain Flynn felt emotion rise in his chest. He had come to this world expecting to provide basic diplomatic assistance. He was ending up creating something far more meaningful. "Cristalarch, that is one of the greatest honors you could bestow," Flynn said. "I will convey this proposal to Admiral Holmes, but I believe she will accept. Because humanity believes that we are all connected. We believe that protecting others is how we fulfill our purpose." Over the next weeks, the reconstruction continued. The 3 Valerian settlements were rebuilt, with better infrastructure than they had before. The Valerians worked alongside the humans. Children from both species played together in recreation areas. Humans and Valerians shared meals and shared knowledge. A new kind of relationship was being born, one based on genuine respect and mutual commitment. 3 weeks after the first human ship arrived in Valerian space, the formal ceremony took place. The Valerian Council had prepared a great hall that had been rebuilt by human engineers and Valerian workers together. The space was large and open, with crystal walls that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. It was a place of importance and tradition. the kind of place where the most significant decisions in Valyrian history were made. Crystallark Velon stood at the center of the hall, his ancient crystalline body glowing with a warm inner light. Around him stood members of the Valyrian Council and representatives from all three settlements. On one side of the hall stood Captain Marcus Flynn, Admiral Catherine Holmes, Commander Robert Hayes, Dr. Henry Patterson, Dr. Lisa Morgan, and Officer Paul Adams. Behind them stood crews from the human fleet, soldiers and engineers and medical personnel who had worked side by side with the Valyrians for the past 3 weeks. The ceremony began with the Valyrian ritual of remembrance. The council spoke the names of those who had been lost in the Corthian attacks. They spoke of homes destroyed and lives changed forever, but they also spoke of recovery and hope, and the unexpected friendship that had emerged from crisis. Then Crystallark Velon stepped forward and addressed the assembly. His voice carried the weight of ancient authority and the emotion of the present moment. "We gather today to formalize something that has already been written in our hearts," Velon said. "The humans came to us as strangers. They owed us nothing. They risked nothing by ignoring our call for help. But they came anyway. They came with their full strength, their full resources, and their full commitment." The Crystallark paused and looked directly at Admiral Holmes. "In Valyrian tradition, we recognize certain species as kin. This is the highest honor we can bestow. It means that the bond between our peoples is deeper than alliance. It means that we view your people as family. Today, I am proposing to the Council that humanity be formally recognized as kin species of the Valyrians." A wave of crystalline light moved through the assembled Valyrians as they showed their approval. The ritual was simple but profound. One by one, each member of the council placed their hand on a central crystal. When all the council members had done this, the crystal began to glow with a light so bright that it filled the entire hall. Velon turned to Admiral Holmes and extended his hand. "Admiral Catherine Holmes, on behalf of the Valyrian people, I welcome you and your species as kin. This bond cannot be broken. Your enemies are our enemies. Your allies are our allies. Your people are our people." Admiral Holmes stepped forward and took the Crystallark's hand. She was not an emotional person by nature, but this moment touched something deep within her. She understood the significance of what was happening. This was not just a political alliance. This was the beginning of something much more meaningful. "Crystallark Velon, I accept this honor on behalf of humanity and on behalf of the Third Fleet," Holmes said. Her voice was steady and strong. "We will never forget what you have given us today. We will stand with you always. Any threat to Valyrian space will be treated as a threat to Earth itself. This I promise you, and this promise comes from the deepest part of the human commitment to protect those we care about." The hall erupted in celebration. Valyrians and humans embraced each other. Some were crying, both the crystalline tears of the Valyrians and the tears of the humans. In this moment, two species that had been strangers weeks before had become family. After the formal ceremony, there was a gathering where both species shared food and conversation. The humans had brought supplies from Earth, and the Valyrians had prepared their traditional meals. They sat together and talked about their worlds, their histories, their hopes for the future. Captain Flynn found himself talking with a young Valyrian named Kella, the same one that Dr. Patterson had saved. She asked him about Earth and about humanity. Flynn described the vast oceans of Earth, the forests and mountains, the diversity of life on the human homeworld. "It sounds beautiful," Kella said. "So different from Valyria." "It is," Flynn agreed. "Earth is harsh in many ways. Our world pushed us to become strong and adaptable. Sometimes I think that is why we responded so quickly to your distress call. We understand struggle. We understand what it means to fight for survival. And we understand that when our friends are in danger, we must act." Across the hall, Admiral Holmes was in conversation with Crystallark Velon. The ancient Valyrian asked her about her life and her career. Holmes told him about her rise through the military ranks, about the choices she had made, about her belief that military power should always be used in service of protection rather than conquest. "I have spent my entire life preparing for moments like this," Holmes said. "Moments where the strength I have trained with can be used to help those in need instead of to take from them." The Corthians believed that strength was for domination. I believe that strength is for protection. That is the difference between humanity at its worst and humanity at its best. Velon listened carefully. "This is why the Valyrians recognize you as kin. This is why we are willing to bind our future to yours. You understand something that most species never learn. You understand that true power is measured not by what you can take, but by what you can protect and preserve. In the days that followed, the human fleet began establishing a permanent presence in Valerian space. Admiral Holmes announced that a human military garrison would remain in the primary settlement. The garrison would serve as both a defensive force and a symbol of humanity's ongoing commitment to Valerian protection. More importantly, the humans and Valerians began planning for the future together. Trade agreements were established. Educational exchanges were arranged. Human scientists and Valerian scholars began collaborating on research projects. The two species were not just allies now. They were partners in building something new. Commander Robert Hayes supervised the construction of a new human settlement on one of the Valerian colonies. The settlement was built with both human and Valerian architecture styles blended together. It was a physical representation of the union between the two species. Humans and Valerians worked together to build homes, where both could live together in harmony. Dr. Henry Patterson established a joint medical research center where human and Valerian healers could work together to develop new treatments and medicines. The collaboration was producing remarkable results. Human medical technology combined with Valerian biological knowledge was creating medical advances that neither species could have achieved alone. Officer Paul Adams worked with Valerian communication specialists to ensure that the two species could communicate clearly and completely. He was developing translation protocols that captured not just the words of each species, but also the cultural context and meaning behind them. This work was laying the foundation for deeper mutual understanding. On the observation platform where Captain Flynn and Crystallark Velen had first watched the human fleet arrive, they stood together again. The settlement below was visibly different from 3 weeks before. Damaged buildings had been repaired. New structures were being built. The landscape was filled with both human and Valerian workers, the two species moving together with purpose and coordination. "I have been thinking about what happened," Flynn said. "We came here expecting to provide basic diplomatic assistance. Instead, we ended up creating something unprecedented, an alliance between two species built not on strategic interest, but on genuine compassion and mutual respect." Velan's crystalline body glowed softly as he reflected on Flynn's words. "When your people arrived, I thought they were coming to conquer us. I thought they would demand payment or service in return for their protection. Instead, they asked only for friendship. This is why we recognize them as kin, because in their hearts your people understand what we have always believed, that the most important thing is not what you have, but who you have beside you." Flynn nodded. "That is the humanity that I am proud of. Not the warriors in the fleet, though I am proud of them too, but the compassion, the willingness to help, the understanding that protecting others is what gives life meaning." In Earth's government chambers, the decision was made to expand the human presence in Valerian space. More settlements would be established. More trade would be encouraged. More cultural exchange would be facilitated. Humanity had found not just an ally, but a true friend in the Valerians. As the sun set over the primary Valerian settlement, casting orange and red light across the crystal buildings, humans and Valerians gathered in the central plaza. They stood together, representatives of two different worlds, united by more than politics or strategy. They were united by the understanding that compassion was stronger than fear, and that protection was the highest expression of strength. Captain Flynn stood with Admiral Holmes, watching the scene before them. Both of them understood that they were witnessing the birth of something that would echo through history. The day when the Deathworlders came not to conquer but to protect. The day when two species became family. The day when the galaxy learned that humanity's greatest strength was not its weapons but its heart. 6 months had passed since the formal ceremony recognizing humanity as kin species. The transformation of Valerian space was remarkable. What had once been a region marked by destruction and fear was now a place of hope and cooperation. The news of humanity's role in saving the Valerians spread throughout the galactic community, and the implications were enormous. In a distant sector of space, the Andorians received the reports. They were a proud species, technologically advanced but isolated. They had heard the stories about the humans but had dismissed them as exaggeration. Learning that humans had not only defeated an entire Korthian battle group, but had done so while simultaneously managing a humanitarian crisis, changed their perspective entirely. The Andorian Council reached out to humanity, requesting formal diplomatic relations. Similarly, the Taraxians, a merchant species that traded throughout the galaxy, began to see the value in human friendship. They proposed trade agreements that would benefit both humans and other species. Word spread quickly through the commercial networks. Humanity was not just a military power. Humanity was a reliable partner, a protector of the weak, and a species worth trading with. Captain Marcus Flynn had returned to the primary Valerian settlement after brief leave on Earth. He brought news and official communications from the Earth government. The human delegation that had initially been planned as a small diplomatic team was now being expanded into a permanent embassy. More human settlers would be arriving. More cultural exchange programs would be established. Flynn walked through the settlement with Crystallark Velen. The changes were visible everywhere. The rebuilt structures had been completed and improved beyond their original state. New gardens had been planted, combining human and Valerian agricultural knowledge. A school had been established where young humans and young Valerians learned together, studying both species' history and culture. "Your world is truly remarkable," Velon said as they walked. "When we first reached out to you in desperation, we did not know what to expect. We thought perhaps you would send one ship and we would have to negotiate for survival. Instead, you sent an entire fleet, and more importantly, you sent people who cared about our survival." Flynn smiled. "That is humanity at its best. We remember what it was like to struggle. We remember what it felt like when we thought we might not survive. That memory teaches us that when others face that same threat, we must help. We must stand with them." In the Joint Medical Research Center, Dr. Henry Patterson was working with a Valerian healer named Stellus on a breakthrough treatment for crystal degenerative disease. For centuries, Valerians had suffered from this condition, which slowly broke down their crystalline bodies. The disease was inevitable and eventually fatal. But combining human medical technology with Valerian biological understanding, they had developed a treatment that could slow or even halt the progression of the disease. "This would not have been possible without your partnership," Stellus said to Patterson. "Our scholars have studied this disease for generations. We understood the biological mechanisms, but we lacked the technology to intervene. Your people provided tools we did not have. But more than that, you provided hope." Patterson placed a hand on Stellus's shoulder. "Medicine is about hope. It is about saying to people who are suffering that there is a way forward. That is true whether you are human or Valerian. We are honored to work alongside you." The human settlement that was being constructed on one of the Valerian colonies was progressing rapidly. Commander Robert Hayes oversaw the construction with his usual efficiency and care. But what made the project special was that it was being built as a true joint venture. The architecture reflected both human and Valerian design principles. The infrastructure was designed to support both species comfortably. A young human engineer named David worked alongside a Valerian engineer named Kren. They were designing a water system that would serve both communities. David brought human engineering principles, while Kren contributed knowledge of the local geology and water sources. Their collaboration resulted in a system that was both more efficient and more beautiful than either species could have designed alone. "I never expected to work with an alien species on something like this," David said to Kren one afternoon as they reviewed their plans. "We have a saying among the Valerians," Kren replied. "When you build with someone, you build a bridge between your peoples. Every structure we create together makes our friendship stronger." Officer Paul Adams had become deeply involved in developing educational materials about human culture for Valerian students and Valerian culture for human students. He believed that understanding came through knowledge, and that real peace was built on genuine comprehension of each other's ways. One day, he was teaching a class of young Valerians about Earth. He showed them images of mountains and oceans, forests and deserts. He told them about human history, about the struggles and achievements of his people. A young Valerian named Tren asked him, "Why do humans study war so much in your history classes?" Paul thought carefully about the answer. "Because humans came from a world where resources were limited. We had to fight for survival. We competed with each other for food and land. This made us strong and resilient, but it also taught us something else. It taught us that violence carries a cost. It taught us that peace is more valuable than victory. When we learned that lesson, we became capable of great compassion." Back in the Human Fleet Command Center, Admiral Catherine Holmes was reviewing reports from across the Valerian systems. The military situation was stable. The Corthians had not returned. Other aggressive species had learned the lesson. Valerian space was now one of the safest regions in this sector of the galaxy, but Holmes was more interested in the non-military reports. She read updates about the joint research projects, the cultural exchange programs, the shared settlements. She saw images of humans and Valerians working together, playing together, building together. She thought about the decisions she had made months ago. Some of her advisors had questioned whether humanity should commit so fully to protecting the Valerians. Some had argued for a more limited response, but Holmes had trusted her instincts. She had understood that the Valerians were worth protecting, not because of strategic interest or resource value, but because they were a good people who deserved to survive. That decision had changed everything, not just for the Valerians, but for humanity's standing in the galaxy. Species that had previously been neutral toward humanity now viewed them with respect and admiration. Species that had feared humanity now saw them as protectors rather than threats. Crystallark Velen addressed the Valerian Council in their meeting chamber. The chamber had been fully restored and was now a place of true beauty. Crystal walls caught the light and created rainbows that danced across the room. 6 months ago, Velen said, we stood on the edge of extinction. The Corthians were destroying us and we had nowhere to turn. We made a choice. We called to the humans, a species we had never met, and we asked for help. The council members listened intently. The humans could have ignored us, Velen continued. They could have decided that our survival was not their concern, but they did not. Instead, they sent their greatest warriors. They shed their blood in our defense. They lost personnel in the battle against the Corthians, but they considered it worth the cost because they believe that protecting others is what gives life meaning. Velen paused and looked at each council member directly. Now, as we move forward, we must ask ourselves what kind of relationship we want with humanity. The military threat has ended. The Corthians are gone. We no longer desperately need their protection in the same way we did 6 months ago, but I believe we should continue this alliance not because we must, but because we want to. Because in the humans, we have found not just allies, but true family. I propose that we expand our commitment to this partnership, that we invite more human settlers, that we establish joint governance structures in the shared settlements, that we make this union permanent and binding. The vote was unanimous. The Valerian Council agreed to deepen and expand the alliance with humanity. A message was sent to Earth Command and to Admiral Holmes. The Valerians were not just accepting humanity's protection. They were embracing humanity as part of their future. That evening, as the sun set over the primary Valerian settlement, Captain Flynn and Crystallark Velen stood together once again on the observation platform. They looked out at the landscape below, seeing humans and Valerians moving together, working together, building together. When this began, Flynn said, I thought I understood what we were doing here. I thought we were providing military assistance and humanitarian aid to an alien species. But that was not what happened. What happened was much more significant. We found family. We found a people worth committing to. We found a reason to be more than just warriors. We became protectors, healers, teachers, and partners. Velen's crystalline body glowed softly in the fading light. You brought us more than protection, Captain. You brought us hope. You showed us that there are species in the galaxy that value compassion as much as we do. You showed us that we are not alone. That is the greatest gift anyone could give. As darkness fell over,